From Shem to Eber to Abraham. I provided an old Earth perspective for the origins of Afro-Asiatics and Proto-Semites. Now I'm going to provide a young Earth perspective for the origins of Afro-Asiatics and Semites. I believe it is good to first understand academically the origins of Afro-Asiatic Semites. Now we can harmonize what we learned with scriptures. Remember, our goal is to discover who are the ancestors of Israel. By knowing the ancestors of Israel, this can help us figure out the genotype and phenotype of the ancient Israelites. Furthermore, this can help us understand who the descendants of the Israelites are today. One of the most important things to remember is this: the Israelites are Afro-Asiatic Semites, and the Israelites follow their lineage paternally. And just here's a visualization to the right-hand side of the screen of the lineage of Israel, and to the left is the distribution of the Afro-Asiatic languages, and Semitic is seen in both Africa and the Middle East, the largest of the Afro-Asiatic languages. Y DNA chromosomes will be important to us again, as well as other DNA methods. But this is why I titled the video From Shem to Eber to Abraham. These three men are extremely important to the ancestry of Israel and even other Semitic populations. They are the key to understanding the genetics of Semites. But before we dive into Shem, Eber, and Abraham, let's quickly cover the young Earth perspective when it comes to creation. For more information on young Earth creationism, I advise that you look at my playlist that actually covers young Earth creationism. It's right here. All you have to do is click, and I have 45 videos that cover young Earth creationism. You have to do this on your own time, so consider this to be homework, but good homework when it comes to understanding young Earth creationism. 45 videos from my playlist of the Hebrew of Israel that covers young Earth creationism if you want to understand the various aspects when it comes to creationists who believe in this form of creation. I have the same thing for a old Earth as well. 8 good videos that can explain that the Earth can also be old. But of course, for today, we're dealing with young Earth creationism. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account, and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. Genesis chapter 1 covers creationism. If you take a literal approach to the scriptures, the Most High created the earth in 6 days, and he rested on the seventh. And then Genesis chapter 2 covers the Garden of Eden. Now, where was the Garden of Eden? Genesis chapter 2, verse 8 through 14 says, "The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became four river heads. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one which skirts the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and oxenstone are there. The name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one which goes around the whole land of Cush. The name of the third river is Hiddekel. It is the one which goes towards the east of Assyria. The fourth river is the Euphrates. Now, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, I believe when it came to the world before the flood, from a young Earth perspective, would have been more like Pangea, entire continent, one continent for the whole planet. And the four rivers would be basically the Nile River, the Red Sea, and the, of course, Euphrates and Tigris River. And the Garden of Eden itself would be Israel. So here's a closer image. Here's a wide image, and I'll get a bit closer on the next one. So here it is. Basically, when it comes to the land of Nod, because of course Nod is mentioned, the land of Nod would have been, unironically, the land of Babylon, or in that territory that will become future Babylon. And as you can see, Eden would have been in the area of the Levant or Israel. And then you have the various rivers coming from Africa and the Middle East, filtering the land. And basically, Eden would be Africa. Eden, the land, would be Africa. But of course, the garden was eastward of Eden. And so in this case, this would be Israel, the land of Israel. And so this is the way I sort of envision the land of Eden and the garden of Eden. Eden, Africa, the garden is Israel, which is east of Africa. So, with that being said, what did Adam and Eve look like? Adam was created from the dust of the ground. This is mentioned in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4 through 7. And it says, "But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being." In the Hebrew, that word is Adamah. Adamah. And Adamah has various meanings. The largest meaning is land, next, earth, soil, land, earth, soil, nation, property, dust. But for the most part, it is earth and arable ground. So it's dealing with the surface of the world. Adam literally means red, and there is an etymological connection between Adam and Adamah. Adamah designating red clay or red ground in a non-theological context. The Hebrew word Adamah means land, ground, or soil. The word Adamah could then be more literally translated red ground. And the name Adam could be said to mean red man or man from the red dirt. This was from gotquestions.com. What is the meaning of the Hebrew word Adamah? And ground, red ground, earth, for a meaning of Adamah from NOBSE Study Bible, name list readings, red ground. This is from Avram Publications. And so here is an image of red dirt or the red ground. And here is an image of the red ground when it's applied to people with lighter skin complexions. You can see a obvious difference between someone who is extremely light skinned versus someone who is or the color of red ground. And down here you can actually see red ground that is wet, and it's even a slightly darker color. And again, here are people next to red ground. We can probably rule out that Adam would have been extremely light skinned. He would have likely been a reddish brown complexion. And here are more people with red clay on their faces. I would say when it comes to Adam, that he would look more like this man who perfectly fits the description of red ground or red clay. As you can see, his skin tone is a perfect match. When it comes to these women as well, their skin tone matches that of the ground or the dirt, red ground, or just regular brown dirt versus the other people that we saw. But with that being said, what does science have to say about Adam when it came to his phenotype? I am protected under the copyright law of Title 17 USC Section 107 for the clip that I'm about to play. And I am protected under the Fair Use Act. Again, I am protected under the Fair Use Act, and I'm using this video for teaching purposes and for research. So, putting that out there.
Jefferson may look European, but his Y chromosome tells a different story. It shows that what we look like may not really tell us where we come from. And it raises a question mark over the traditional image of Adam. For centuries, artists have depicted him like this, like a European. For many of us, this is Adam. Michelangelo's famous painting in the Vatican Sistine Chapel. He looks like a beautiful Italian who spends a lot of time in the gym. Did the common ancestor of all men really look like this? The story of Jefferson suggests he could have looked very different. Finally, Wells comes face to face with the man he's been searching for. A new portrait of the common ancestor of every man today. Adam. Without a skull, we can't know for sure what Adam looked like. But a combination of genetic evidence, Bender's forensic skills, and cutting-edge computer software suggests he looks something like this. Thousands of years after the Bible, and hundreds of years after Michelangelo, we have a whole new face for Adam.
I like the expression. He's got a very forceful look.
He's intent on something, maybe taking over the world. You begin to get perhaps an insight into why these guys won out and why this guy's our ancestor.
So from a scientific standpoint, Adam would have been dark-skinned, dark-haired, and dark-eyed, specifically like a dark brown, similar to the dirt, the ground. And so therefore, Adam's description is very similar to that of the scriptures when it comes to a scientific standpoint, if he's coming from a dark substance of the earth, like a reddish brown clay. But furthermore, it will even seem like from a scientific standpoint that Adam would have looked somewhat African, which is fairly interesting. With that being said, what do Christian scientists have to say about Adam and Eve when it came to their phenotype and skin tone? Again, copyright disclaimer. I am protected under the Fair Use Act, and this is for teaching purposes for the next video clip that I'm about to share. Again, copyright disclaimer. I am protected under the fair use, and this is for teaching and research purposes.
I hear this one a lot. How can there be so many races in the world if we are all descendants of Adam and Eve? Well, check this out. First off, let's talk about the word race. Sometimes when people use the word, they mean supposed races of people who have evolved at different times, rates, and in different locations. That's not true. Of course, the word race is also a term we use to distinguish between groups with different physical traits, namely skin color. But are there really different races? Take a gander at Acts 17:26, where it is written that God, from one man, made every nation of men. It's clear then that the Bible teaches that there is one race, the human race. The Bible is also clear that all people on the earth are descendants of Adam and Eve who were created by God. Check Genesis 1:26 through 28. Easy enough. God created two people in his image, male and female, and told them to increase in number. So, Adam and Eve are mom and dad of the human race. Then, their children had children, and those children had children, and so on and so forth for many generations until, according to Genesis 6:9, the world's population was reduced to 8 people who were protected inside an ark during a global flood. And those 8 people later walked off the ark, and according to Genesis 9:19, from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Oh, wait a second. What do I mean scattered? Well, jump over to Genesis 11, and let's talk about an event known as the Tower of Babel. Basically, because of the sinful actions of the descendants of Noah, the Lord confused their language and scattered them from there over all the earth. That's pretty clear and concise. Okay, so we've got lots of people who were descendants of the 8 folks who came off the ark, and now they have been scattered all over the earth. That explains that we are still one race and that different groups of people ended up in different locations. But how do we get a bunch of different colored people if we are all one race? Well, follow along. This, of course, is a simplified explanation, but the basic principles are true. We all have a pigment in our bodies called melanin, which, depending on different variables, produces different shades of the one main skin color we all possess. Several genes control the amount of melanin produced and thus the variability in the skin shade. In fact, it's easy for one couple to produce a wide range of skin shade variability in just one generation, as we'll see in just a moment. Time for a quick genetics lesson. DNA is the molecule of heredity that is passed from parents to children. A child inherits 23 chromosomes from each parent. Each chromosome pair contains hundreds of genes, which regulate the physical development of the child. However, to illustrate basic genetic principles pertaining to the topic, we'll just talk about 2 genes, the genes that control the production of melanin. So, let capital A and capital B symbolize versions of the gene that code for large amounts of melanin, while little a and little b code for small amounts. Got it? Easy. Check this out. Take a look at the upper left. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B genes, and mom contributes capital A, capital B genes as well. Together they will produce a child with capital A, capital B, and capital B. This is a kid with a lot of melanin, and thus he will have very dark skin. Easy to see. Here's the bigger point though. Let's say dad contributes capital A, capital B, and mom contributes little a and little b. Well, the child's skin will be middle brown shade, the combination of capital A, little a, and capital B, little b, which by the way represents a majority of the world's population. Not only that, but if each parent is capital A, capital B, little b, the combinations that could be produced in their children could result in a very wide range of skin shades in just one generation. So, since Adam and Eve were the first people ever, it makes sense to conclude that God placed in them a combination of genes that could produce all different shades of skin we see. Those same combinations would be present in Noah and the 7 other people who boarded the ark. And because God dispersed people at the Tower of Babel, he dispersed the population, thereby isolating gene pools in the different people groups. Over time, different cultures formed in different locations with certain features like skin shade becoming predominant. And here we are today. And since we all go back to Noah and his family, it makes sense that we are all different shades of brown. One race, multiple people groups, just like the Bible teaches. Simplified for sure, but enough said.
So, from a scriptural perspective, a Christian scientific perspective, and even a secular scientific perspective, it would seem that early man or Adam and Eve would have been a people group with dark skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. Specifically, they would have been perhaps brown, a reddish brown color. And I do agree that it would make a lot of sense for Adam and Eve to basically be medium brown or middle brown in skin tone, capital A, lowercase a, capital B, lowercase b. This is, like as he said, the skin tone that's typical among most humans. Even today, most humans are medium brown, and it would make sense that Adam and Eve would have carried genes for dark skin and later light skin. But of course, everyone starting off with a more darker complexion and then getting lighter due to later genetic mutations, regions, and things of that nature. So I would say Adam and Eve, like this man, you can see on the left hand side, and this woman, you can see on the right hand side with dark brown red clay in the background. They would have been a brown, reddish brown complexion. Genesis chapter 5 covers from Adam to Noah. This is the genealogy. And of course, this is important because all humans descend from Noah, and specifically his sons Japheth, Shem, and Ham. We're all Noahites. Genesis chapter 6 covers the ark. And of course, the ark is what saved our ancestors, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, from the great flood. And Genesis chapter 7, of course, mentions the flood. A flood that would have covered the whole earth from a young earth perspective. The earth would have been, as I said before, Pangea, and the flood would have covered it and broke apart under the waters. And this is how we have our modern world today. There are various videos, as I showed before, that can cover how this would have happened from a young earth perspective. I have a playlist called Young Earth Creationism that you can check out. But basically, the tectonic plates would have broke apart under the waters during the flood, creating the modern continents of today. Genesis chapter 8 covers the ark resting, everybody coming off the ark, all the animals. And I believe that when it came to the resting of the ark, it would have been around the area of Mount Judy. This is a place known by both early Christians and even in Islamic tradition that the ark would have rested around that area. Jewish, Babylonian, Syriac, Islamic, and early Christian traditions identify Mount Judy or Kudi as a peak near or northeast of the town of Jezreel ibn Abur, at the headwaters of the Tigris River near the modern border with Syria and that of Iraq. And there are various mentions of Mount Judy in the Samaritan Pentateuch, Book of Jubilees, Josephus, Julius Africanus, and many others. Many people say that Mount Judy was the place where the ark rested. And so here is a visual representation of where Mount Judy is. As they said, it is near Syria and Iraq, northern Syria, northern Iraq, and southern Turkey. And this is a perfect place for the ark to rest, for all humans to disperse from, and all animals to disperse from, going into the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe. It's dead center. And I will actually have a video playlist that covers that, because many biblical archaeologists seem to have found the Ark of Noah at Mount Judy. Here is a shape, a very interesting shape in that region that could show that a ship was there and that it split. And how do you get a massive ship in the middle of land today? I think it would make a lot of sense that this is just the leftovers of the ark and how the dirt would have covered it and how it would have slightly sunk into the ground after all that time. And I will have a playlist of videos that can prove Mount Judy is the ark where Noah and Shem, Ham, and Japheth would have left from. And you can check that out in my playlist. Now, Genesis chapter 11 mentions the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 through 6. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole world. But the Lord came down to the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Come, let us go down and there, confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the tower. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. And here's just a good, interesting representation of all the languages that would have just popped out from the Tower of Babel. But the Tower of Babel likely would have been in modern day Iraq, somewhere near the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. And now we begin with Shem. Since he is our main and first target for the ancestors of the Afro-Asiatic Semitic peoples, he's the main person we gotta look at. Remember, according to the genealogy, the Israelites descend from Shem. This is a paternal lineage, and they would be a Afro-Asiatic Semitic people. I believe Shem and his descendants would have settled around Mesopotamia, specifically in the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf is a perfect place where I believe Shem and all of them would have been, all the Semites. And here's just another map showing the Persian Gulf and the area where the Euphrates River and Tigris River would have split. And here's just another visual representation. A lot of the early cities were also near the Persian Gulf where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are. But I believe Shem at some point would have left the Persian Gulf and settled in the future promised land, or the land of Israel. And so there would have been a migration going from from the east to the west. The reason for leaving would have been due to the wickedness of the people. But with that being said, what evidence do I have that Shem could have settled the future promised land of Israel? Well, one of the best evidence that I have is that Shem could be Melchizedek. Melchizedek was mentioned in the scriptures as being a king and priest of the city of Jerusalem. Genesis chapter 14, verse 18 through 20 says that Melchizedek is the king of Salem and that he is the priest of the God Most High. In scripture, Noah says that blessed by the Lord God of Shem. The God of Shem is very interesting because this leads me to believe the mantle was passed down from Noah to Shem. And he said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem. Genesis chapter 9, verse 26. The story from creation to the fall of man to the flood and the knowledge of God was likely passed down. The people who preserved the truth was from the lineage of Shem. This is why there is ancient tradition that Shem is Melchizedek. This is from Chabad.org, who named Jerusalem. And it says, an ancient tradition tells us that Melchizedek was actually one and the same as Shem, the son of Noah, and that Shalom was none other than the very place that Abraham would eventually rename Rayam. So Shalom is the second half of Rayam plus Shalom, which is Yerushalayim. In the Bible, Melchizedek was the king of Salem and priest of El Elyon, often translated as Most High God. He is first mentioned in Genesis chapter 14, verse 18 through 20, where he brings out bread and wine and then blesses Abram and El Elyon. Chesrolik literature, specifically Torgrum Jonathan, Torgrum Yasharal, and the Babylonian Talmud, represents the name in Hebrew right there, as a nickname title for Shem. I believe that's Melchizedek in Hebrew, if I know my Hebrew correctly. But I believe Eber would have also left Mesopotamia because of the Tower of Babel when they began to build it. The name Eber or Ivri means to cross over. Where would Eber have crossed over from? He would have crossed over the Euphrates River, much like Abraham. So Eber, it means region beyond in the Hebrew. And Eber is a very important figure because we see in scripture the lineage goes from Shem to Eber. In a sense, you can see the passing of the torch. Genesis chapter 9, verse 26, and he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem." In Genesis chapter 10, verse 21, and the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber. As you can see, it skips Arphaxad and Shelah, and it goes straight to Eber. It's very interesting. Shem or Eber could have been Melchizedek, but one thing is for certain, that I do believe a type of priesthood may have been centered around them, or at least these two men were the essential figures for a continuing of the traditions and oral history of the first chapters of Genesis. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered our enemies into your hand, and give him a tithe of all." Genesis chapter 14, verse 18 through 20. In pre-Mosaic times, priestly duties were performed by the father or patriarchal head of the family or tribe. In patriarchal times, the office was held and its duties were discharged by those who occupied some sort of headship, and particularly by the father or the chief of the family and of the tribe. Thus, Noah, in his capacity of priest and in behalf of his household, built an altar unto Yahuwah, and took of every clean beast and of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar, which is mentioned in Genesis chapter 22, verse 13. Melchizedek was priest, God of the Most High. Genesis chapter 14, 18. Isaac built an altar there and called upon the name Yahuwah. Genesis chapter 26 through 25. As did Jacob in Genesis chapter 33, verse 20. In this case, priestly acts were performed by the patriarchs in their capacity as fathers of the family or head of clans. From the beginning, priesthood was in acts of explanation and of worship, was thus recognized as a divinatively instituted office. And so, as you can see from the chart above, Noah carried the priesthood through the flood, and it would have been passed on to Shem, then Eber, and then the next one who was alive when Eber died would have been Abraham. And this is from Adam Becker. I agree that Melchizedek was either Shem or Eber. Both were in line of the priesthood, and their lives overlap Abraham's. And when he means that, he's saying that, when it comes to the genealogies mentioned in Genesis, that, if you take this to be literal, Shem and Eber both would have lived around the time when Abraham was born. But not only that, Eber actually would have outlived Abraham as well, to a slight degree. But here's the genealogies. You have Shem, and then you have Eber, and then you have Abraham right here, and they actually, Abraham would have been alive. Well, Shem and Eber would have been alive around the time of Abraham. So it's fairly interesting. So either Shem or Eber was at the time king of the nearby city of Salem, which was across a small valley from the city Jeru, which later merged together into a single city, Jerusalem. The priestly line passed from from Noah, Shem, Eber, and Abraham, then on down the line of Levi. Now, there is an interesting tradition that Eber was not part of the building of the Tower of Babel, and because of this, he kept his Semitic tongue. This belief is held by both Jews and Arabs. Eber was the first grandson of the first was the great grandson of Shem and an ancestor of Abraham. The earth was divided in the time of Eber's son Peleg, mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, verse 25, as well as 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 19, which may refer to the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 10, verse 32, as well as Genesis chapter 11, verse 9. Tradition states that Eber and his descendants refused to help with the building of the Tower of Babel and thus preserve the original human language, which might have been Hebrew. In Jewish tradition, Eber, the great grandson of Shem, refused to help with the building of the Tower of Babel, so his language was not confused when it was abandoned. He and his family along retained the original human language, Hebrew, a language named after Eber, or Hebrew, also called lingua humana in Latin. 13th century Muslim historian Abu al-Finded relates a story noting that the patriarch Eber, great-grandson of Shem, refused to help in the building of the Tower of Babel, so his language was not confused when it was abandoned. And so this is very interesting because this fits perfectly with Eber and his family leaving Mesopotamia and living in the future land of Israel. Like I said, I do believe a type of mantle was passed down from Noah to Shem to Eber and Melchizedek. Genesis chapter 9, verse 26, and he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Shem." Genesis chapter 10, verse 21, and the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber. Genesis chapter 14, verse 18, Melchizedek, king of Salem, the priest of God Most High. So that's very interesting. Like I said, Melchizedek could be Shem or Eber, but he could be someone else entirely. But one of the key things to take from this is that there was a king / priesthood that followed the God of Shem. Keep that in mind. There was a king and priesthood that followed and knew about the God of Shem. And 2, there was a king that was ruling in Jerusalem. So why is this important? Well, Jerusalem is one of the oldest cities in the Levant. Therefore, the name Jerusalem is a Semitic name. This is from Britannia, Ancient Origins of the City. The earliest traces of human settlement in the city area found on a hill to the southeast are from the late Chalcolithic period, or Copper Age, and early Bronze Age. Excavations have revealed that a settlement existed on a site south of the Temple Mount, and a massive town wall was found just above the Gihon Spring, which determined the location of the ancient settlement. The name, known in its earliest form as Jerusalem, is probably of Western Semitic origin, and apparently means foundation of Shalom, God. Very interesting. A biblical narrative mentions the meeting of a Canaanite, Melchizedek, said to be king of Salem, Jerusalem, with the Hebrew patriarch Abraham. Jerusalem is roughly dated to the late Copper to early Bronze Age. The oldest part of the city was settled in the 4th millennium BCE. making Jerusalem one of the oldest cities in the world. There, the Gihon Spring attracted shepherds who camped near the water between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago, leaving behind ceramics and flint artifacts during the Chalcolithic or Copper Age, 4,500 through 3,500 BCE. And this is from Chilion and Chilwa, a visitor's guide. And it says the first 3,000 years, 5,000 to 2000 BCE, near the river that flowed down the slope of the hill and the stream at its base, shepherds would occasionally set their camp with their flocks. Their presence is marked by ceramics and flint artifacts 6,000 through 7,000 years old. Hundreds of years later, permanent houses began to be built, and about 5,000 years ago, which is around 3000 BCE, the place had already become a small village whose residents used the natural caves in the side of the mountains for burial. And this is from Haaretz, Why is Jerusalem called Jerusalem? Going by the archaeological evidence found so far, Jerusalem was founded about 6,000 years ago, and it may have had roughly the name from the beginning. And this is from World History Encyclopedia, Jerusalem. There is material evidence of occupation in the Chalcolithic period, 4,500 through 3,400 BCE, and the Middle Bronze Age II period, which was 18,000 through 15,000 BCE. And this is from history.com. Early history of Jerusalem. Scholars believe the first human settlements in Jerusalem took place during the early Bronze Age, somewhere around 3,500 BCE. All right, so we are likely dealing with a Semitic population in the Levant. The city of Jerusalem that Melchizedek ruled under is a known ancient city, and the name Jerusalem or Jerusalem is Semitic. Abraham met Melchizedek. So one, they could understand each other. When they were speaking, it's likely clear that they both were speaking a Semitic language. Two, they both followed similar Semitic customs, the customs mentioned in that chapter when Abraham meets Melchizedek. All those customs are very Semitic. And three, they both were aware or served and knew about the god of Shem, because obviously that's mentioned in the scripture. And four, Jerusalem is an ancient Levantine city with a Semitic name. And that's the fourth most important thing to keep in mind. So, this shows that there was likely a Semitic population in the Levant long before Abraham arrived. And this is what I'm basically trying to establish. Abraham was not the first Semite. He likely wasn't the first Semite to come into the land of the Levant. There likely were Semites in the Levant before Abraham arrived, since we have Semitic names, ancient Semitic cities, long before he came there, and he met Semitic people with Semitic customs. So Semites were likely in the Levant. Descendants of Shem were likely in the Levant long before Abraham arrived. And the fact that Jerusalem dates to the late Copper to early Bronze Age is interesting because this is when Proto-Semitic began to expand. Remember what this paper says. And by the way, if you're new to this paper, this is the Bayesian Phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages identifies an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East. And so, reading what's in yellow, it says, we estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by an expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. This fits the exact same time period as this Semitic city of Jerusalem. Reading what's in yellow, the earliest traces of human settlement in the city area found on a hill to the southeast are from the late Chalcolithic period, Copper Age, and the early Bronze Age. The name known in its earliest form as Jerusalem is probably of Western Semitic origin and apparently means foundation of Shalom. Very interesting. When you combine this with the tradition that Eber kept his Semitic tongue because he wasn't part of the Tower of Babel, it's very compelling to believe that the early descendants of Shem, specifically from the lineage of Eber, could have settled the Levant. Basically, they could have left before the Tower of Babel, going into the Levant. But, however, if we were to leave out the idea of Eber losing his language, like let's just hypothetically say, okay, let's not go with that narrative, that Eber didn't lose his tongue. From a biblical point of view, you likely could have had Semites in the Levant before Abraham arrived, anyways. The Semitic culture that Melchizedek followed and the Semitic city of Jerusalem is evidence of that. We have literal archaeological evidence that there were Semites in the Levant before Abraham. Archaeology would back this up, since there is overwhelming evidence that Proto-Semitic people and that the Proto-Semitic language originated in the Levant. You know, why is this important? Or how could this be? Well, it's likely because Shem and Eber and his family lived there. This is why we see the priesthood and kingship of Jerusalem in Israel and not in Mesopotamia. And I think that's the most powerful thing to also keep in mind. The priesthood and the kingship isn't anywhere in Mesopotamia, Iraq, or Syria, or Anatolia, or Turkey. It's specifically in the Levant. It's in Israel, the priesthood and the kingship. It's very, very interesting and important. Then, from the Levant, Semites and the Semitic language and people would have spread back into Mesopotamia, which is what I'm referring to when it comes to the language aspect. As we can see here from the Bayesian model, Semites being in the Levant would have sort of had a back to Mesopotamia migration in a sense. And they also would have spread into Arabia and Africa. So, from a biological and genetic point of view, what population would early descendants of Shem be? The early descendants of Shem will likely be the Basal Eurasians. Basal Eurasians are ancient Middle Easterners. Indigenous Middle Easterners are descendants of Basal Eurasians. Their origins lie around the Arab-Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf is actually where I believe early descendants of Shem were to begin with. So the genetic basin of this area around the Gulf Cemetery Basin is a potential source of the Basal Eurasian origin. High levels of Basal Eurasian ancestry were found in ancient Middle Eastern genomes, which negatively correlated with Neanderthal ancestry. Basal Eurasians may have less Neanderthal ancestry than other ancestral Eurasian lineages, and the extent to which Basal Eurasian ancestry is present may explain the extent to which Neanderthal ancestry is present in Middle Eastern genomes. For an example, a high level of Basal Eurasian or Sub-Saharan African ancestry could be the underlying reason for the low level of Neanderthal ancestry in Qatari Bedouin in comparison to Europeans or other Middle Eastern populations. Bedouins who have the highest level of autochthonous or indigenous Arab genetic ancestry may be the direct descendants of Basal Eurasians. So the most indigenous Middle Easterners have this Basal Eurasian ancestry. And this is from Projecting Ancient Ancestry in Modern Day Arabians and Iranians, a key role of the past exposed Arabo-Persian Gulf of human migrations. And so it reads, East Arabians also display the highest levels of Basal Eurasian lineage of all tested modern-day populations. Not surprisingly, East Arabians were also the ones with higher similarity with Ibero-Maurusians, who were so far the best proxy for the Basal Eurasians amongst the known ancient specimens. Our results are strong evidence to include the exposed basin of Arabo-Persian Gulf as a possible homeland of basal Eurasians to be to be investigated further, on namely by searching ancient Arabian human specimens. The highest levels of basal Eurasian lineage found in East Arabo-Persia reinforce previous genetic and archaeological evidence of early human settlement in the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf. Thus, the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf is a possible homeland of basal Eurasians. A branch of basal Eurasians would have migrated to the Levant. These basal Eurasians would become the ancestors of Natufians. From a biological and genetic point of view, what population would the early descendants of Eber be? In order to solve this riddle, looking at the Book of Jubilees is key because I believe it provides us the clues to his early descendants. The Book of Jubilees is considered the Little Genesis. The Book of Jubilees was found in the Qumran caves with the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is from Desert News. Experts just discovered more fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Reading what's in yellow, a fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls of the text from the Book of Jubilees is on display in the exhibit Dead Sea Scrolls. Between 1947 and 1956, approximately 15 copies of the Book of Jubilees were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is, oh, by the way, that was from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, and this is from the University of Notre Dame, translating the Book of Jubilees. So it says, originally written in Hebrew, Jubilees continues to interest scholars for its commentary on earlier texts. James Van Kim is the John A. O'Brien Professor of Hebrew Scriptures at the University of Notre Dame and a scholar of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of ancient religious texts found between 1947 and 1956 in caves in and around Qumran, along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, about 15 miles east of Jerusalem. This is why, everything that I just said is why I trust the Book of Jubilees to be from a historical perspective. Therefore, I read the Book of Jubilees only for history, but not for spiritual edification. With that being said, let's look at the relevant portion dealing with the wife of Eber. According to the Book of Jubilees, Eber married a woman named Azurad. To the Book of Jubilees, Eber married a woman named Azurad. Book of Jubilees, chapter 8, verse 6 through 10, Eber. And he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod. She bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. The Book of Jubilees mentions the name of Nimrod, the Greek form of Nimrod, only as being the father of Azurad and the wife of Eber, the mother of Peleg. Chapter 8, verse 7. This account would thus make Nimrod an ancestor of Abraham and hence of all Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. The son of Cush, and therefore the great-grandson of Noah, Nimrod. And Cush was the oldest son of Ham, and the grandson of Noah. This was mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, verse 7. So Cush. Cush is a Hebrew name that is possibly derived from Cash, the Egyptian name of Lord Egypt, and later of the Nubian kingdom of Nabata. known as the Kingdom of Cush. The form Cush appears in Egyptian records as early as the reign of Menemhotep II in an inscription detailing his campaigns against the Nubian region. The Nubian kingdom was centered at Meroe in the modern-day nation of Sudan. Cush was the name, and this is from JewishVirtualLibrary.org. Cush was the name of an ancient kingdom in northeast Africa. The portion of the Nile Valley between the first and sixth cataracts was called Cush by the Pharaonic Egyptians, though Western nations preferred the Greek application Nubia. And so when it comes to Cush, son of Ham, his descendants would have settled in the southern part of the Nile Valley. When it comes to Cush, this would be your Proto-Nilotic people. A Proto-Nilotic unity separate from an early undifferentiated Eastern Sudanic unity is assumed to have emerged by the 3rd millennium BC. The Eastern Sudanic unity must have been considerably earlier still, perhaps around the 5th millennium BC. The original locus of the early Nilotic speakers was presumably east of the Nile in what is now South Sudan. The Proto-Nilots of the 3rd millennium BC were pastoralists, while their neighbors, the Proto-Central Sudanic peoples, were mostly agriculturalists. Nilotic people practiced a mixed economy of cattle pastoralism, fishing, and seed cultivation. Genetic and linguistic studies have demonstrated that Nubian people in southern Sudan and southern Egypt are a admixed group that started off as a population closely related to Nilotic people. Nubians are considered to be descendants of the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley, whom later formed the Kingdom of Cush, which included Kerma and Meroe, and the medieval Christian kingdoms of Makurida, Nobotia, and Almade. These studies suggest that populations closely related to Nilotic people long inhabited the Nile Valley as far as southern Egypt in antiquity. And just for phenotype, Nilotic people, when it comes to Nilotic people, they are the specialized African type, native to the swamps and savannas of the Upper Nile region of South Sudan and adjacent countries. With their black skin, they belong to the darkest people on earth. Heads are long, facial features coarse with a rather broad nose, full lips, and kinky hair. Nilots seem to be a relatively old group that might have extended further east into Ethiopia during prehistoric periods. And I would say that from a paternal lineage, Nilots would be haplogroup A, which is still seen in Sudan, ancient land of Cush, to this day. So when it comes to mitochondrial DNA, they typically are haplogroup L. And mtDNA study by Castry in 2008 examined the maternal ancestry of various Nilotic populations in Kenya and Turkania, Samburu, Maasai, and Luo individuals sampled. The mtDNA of almost all of the tested Nilots belong to various sub-Saharan microhaplogroup L subclades, including L0, L2, L3, L4, and L5. And we find L2 in Syria, the exact same region where the matriarchs come from. Haplogroup L2A1 has been found in ancient fossils associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic culture at Tel Halel, Syria. A specimen excavated in the Savannah Pastoral Neolithic site in Luxman in Tanzania also carried the L2A1 clade. Admixture clustering analysis further indicated that the individual bore significant ancestry from the ancient Levant. Very interesting. So Isaac and Jacob married their cousins. That's one thing that's very interesting. That they actually did marry, relatives. So if the wives of Isaac and Jacob descend from Eber and Azurad, then it's highly likely that they could have had mitochondrial L2. So remember, Eber and Azured got together. If Isaac and Jacob's wives also descend from Azured, then she likely could have been, the wives of Isaac and Jacob could have likely been the exact same haplogroup as these, the Cushite lineage of Azured. So here's just a visualization of this. Isaac marries Rebekah, first cousins once removed, and Rebekah and Jacob, their second cousins. Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, their second cousins once removed. And Abraham and Sarah, by the way, are half brother and half sister. So you basically do see a very homogeneous type of mixing among the descendants of Terah. Abraham getting with Sarah, and of course Abraham's son Isaac getting with Rebekah, and then Jacob getting with Leah and Rachel. And if all these ladies descend from Eber and Azured, specifically, Azured, then they could have L markers. It's a high probability. And we do see L, like I said, in Syria. So what's interesting about this is that many Jewish groups specifically have this haplogroup L2A that was found in ancient Syria. L2A1 L2A is recognized as an Ashkenazi specific haplogroup seen among Ashkenazi Jews with ancestry in Central and Eastern Europe, where it is presumed to have come from Ashkenazi admixture. This paper, 60,000 years of interaction between Central and East Africa, documented by major African mitochondrial haplogroup L2. L2A1 is the most complex subclade within L2A, and it harbors lineages from all African regions as well as lineages from other continents, including non-African branches such as L2A, L2A, connected to Ashkenazi Jewish diaspora. L2A1 has clearly a Western/Central African origin and distribution, with many subclades suggesting a recent Bantu migration southwards, and is hardly present in Eastern Africa. L2A11 displays a similar pattern in sub-Saharan Africa. The ancient union between Eber and Azured is fascinating. Essentially, you have an old admixture event before Abraham of Asiatics and Africans. In anthropology, we can find this union. This book is called First Farmers: The Origins of Agricultural Societies. In the mid-Paleocene, desertification of the Sahara was desertification of the Sahara with retraction of summer monsoon finally led to virtual abandonment of the Nabats Plateau and other oasis settlements by around 4000 BC. And this might have led to a kind of refuge movement into the Nile Valley, where Saharan people would have met and mixed with the descendants of the Southwest Asian Neolithic populations, responsible for the introduction of Southwest Asian agricultural tradition into the Nile Valley about 1,500 years earlier. The resulting amalgam was later to develop into one of the most remarkable civilizations of the ancient world, a true synthesis of the Oriental and the African. Within the Egyptian Neolithic lifestyle are found a number of specific cultural items of presumed Palestinian origin, even though no even though no precise source can be pinpointed. Such items included side-notched and tanged bifocal flaked arrowheads occurring in the PP and A pre-pottery Neolithic A and PP and B pre-pottery Neolithic B in the Levant as well as in the Nile Valley. So basically, to sum this up, Saharan people would have mixed with Neolithic Levantines, and and you start to see an amalgam of this culture basically in the Nile Valley and in the Levant. And of course, this is interesting because this kind of follows along with what I was saying about Eber and Azurad. So Shem and Ham, by proximity, were very close to each other. Early Semitic people being in the Levant, and of course, early Hamitic people being in the Upper Nile, near where the rivers would have split. And you would have had a lot of early mixing between these Semites and Hamites. Due to, as I said, due to proximity, it makes sense that Semites and Hamites would mix with each other. From a young Earth perspective, this is one way to explain why early Semites appear African. It's due to ancient admixture. Remember, after all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. From an older perspective, yes, Semites would straight up be Africans, but from a younger perspective, it's due to the heavy admixture with Africans that Semites may appear to be African. You can use this understanding with a young Earth perspective, but also with the older perspective. I want to put that out there again. But let's keep our focus on a young Earth. Basically, this admixture between Shemites and Hamites would have taken place around the time of Eber and Zurad. It was their union and their children that created Proto-Afro-Asiatics. We can even see this genetically. This book is Ancestral Journeys by Jane Mancro, and it says one language family is clearly linked to the spread of farming from the Near East. The Afro-Asiatic family includes ancient Egyptian and other languages that appear in early written records such as Akkadian and Mesopotamia. There is a genetic hint of arrivals from Africa. The African mtDNA L2A1 has been found at the farming settlement of Tel Helula in Syria at the pre-pottery level. Y DNA E1B1B1 across both the north and southern coast of the Mediterranean is a clue that it was the male partner of L2A1. Then, the subclades of E1B1B1 helped to spread farming around the Mediterranean. So we see that Haplogroup E and L2, they would have been partners. With that being said, what human population could best represent Eber and the Zurad and their descendants in the Levant? It is likely the Natufians and Neolithic Levantines. Natufians are the ancestors of Afro-Asiatics, including Semites. This is from Cambridge, and it says, given the modern distribution of Semitic languages over the area in question, which belonged to the larger Afro-Asiatic family, it seems appropriate to suggest that these first farmers of the Levant and their Mesolithic predecessors, including the Natufian culture, were speaking a Proto-Afro-Asiatic language. It may be that Proto-Semitic continued to develop in the Levant and Syria area, since both Ebelite and Akkadian, early Semitic languages, are there attested early and formed around 2400 BC. So Natufians and early Semites, they were all in the Levant. Here's the area of Natufian culture, and that's basically the Levant. And this is from Alexander Matolov, The Prehistory of a Dispersal of Proto-Afrosans, Afroasiatic, Farming Lexicon. The Proto-Afrosan speakers can be identified with high probability with the creators of the Natufian and post-Natufian early Neolithic archaeological culture of the Levant. The identification of Proto-Afrosans as Natufian and post-Natufians seems to satisfy all four criteria. Besides the farming lexicon, there are a set of reconstructed Proto-Afrosan terms pointing to the incipient animal breeding. Finally, the Levant appears to be an attested region from where population began to spread starting in the early Neolithic, covering not only wide tracts of southwestern Asia, but also the adjacent parts of the Mediterranean and Africa. Genetically speaking, Natufians are actually a split between Asiatics and Africans. Remember from this study, the Natufian sample consists of 61.2% Arabian, 21.2% North African, 10.9% Western Asian, and 6.8% Omotic ancestry. The Natufians genetically can be the best fit for the union of Eber and Azurad. Furthermore, the Y chromosome of Natufians is haplogroup E. Such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. And that was from Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus revealed core of West Eurasian ancestry. Therefore, from a genetic point of view, we should focus on 1. The paternal ancestry or the paternal lineage of the Hebrews is likely haplogroup E. The maternal lineage of early Hebrew women is likely haplogroup L2A or L3. 3. The ancient autosomal DNA of early Hebrews is likely Natufian/Neolithic Levantine PPNB. This is what I'll look for when it comes to the Hebrew and Semitic ancestry. I would expect the Israelites to have this genetic makeup, and I will also expect the descendants of the Israelites to have a very similar ancestry as well. Again, all of this is based on the union between Eber and Azurad, an Asiatic/Semite, and an African/Hamitic union. As the book of Jubilees says, Eber, and he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod, and she bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. And here's just a visual representation of how this genealogy would look from Noah to Shem, all the way down to Eber, and then from Noah to Ham, all the way down to Azurad, this union between Shem and Ham, beginning with Eber and Azurad, Afro-Asiatic, or should I say Afro-Asiatic. In order to discover the ethnic ancestry and haplogroup of Abraham, knowing where he comes from is very important. For one, we know that according to the scriptures, Abraham is a Semite because his family's lineage is from Shem. Genesis chapter 11, verse 10 through 26 says, "This is the genealogy of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters." And then from verse 10 to 26 it says, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serg, Nahor. Now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abraham. And so as you can see on the right hand side of your screen is the genealogy, just a straight line, a male lineage specifically. Now furthermore, we know that Abraham was from the city of Ur according to the scriptures. Genesis chapter 11 verse 31 through 32 says, "And Terah took his son Abram, and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, his son Abram's wife. And they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So in the days of Terah there were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran." In the ancient world of Mesopotamia, there were two different cities of Ur. You had a city of Ur in Syria, and you also had a city of Ur in Iraq. We're going to focus on the city of Ur that has the best chance of being the Ur of Abraham, not just according to me, but also to biblical scholars and archaeologists. Here is a short video clip covering this very subject. I am protected under the copyright law of Title 17 USC Section 107 for the clip that I'm about to play. And I am protected under the Fair Use Act. Again, I am protected under the Fair Use Act, and I'm using this video for teaching purposes and for research. So, putting that out there.
Mark Wilson, who wrote the book Biblical Turkey, points out that a previous generation of scholars all thought it was the northern Turkey, the northern Ur in Turkey. And then in 1927, when Leonard Woolley excavated in Iraq and found the great cemetery at Ur, he described the finds as worthy of Abraham. And so the next generation of scholars thought that it was the southern site. And as I've looked at it, I think that there are some good reasons to believe that perhaps the earlier generation had it right, that it might have been the northern Ur. A couple of things. Number one, some of the ancient writers suggest that the Chaldeans, Ur of the Chaldeans actually came from Anatolia and Turkey and migrated south to Mesopotamia at some time. But remember also when Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac, he said, "Go to my own country, to my own relatives," in Genesis 24. And where did the servant go? He didn't go all the way back to Mesopotamia. What he did was he went to Heron, which is located 24 miles just south of the northern city of Ur. And unfortunately, that site is covered with a city of about 2 million people today. But I would suggest that the city of Ur, the northern city of Ur, is a good place to start with number 10. And number 9 is then the city of Heron. After Abraham left Ur, he settled in Heron for several years before making his way to Canaan. And Tel Heron is located on a fertile plain on one of the tributaries of the Euphrates River. And in ancient times, it was at the junction of some major trade routes. And their excavators there have unearthed a large mud brick structure that dates to the end of the 3rd millennium BC. And some of them believe that it may actually have been a precursor to the temple of Sin. Now, Sin was the moon god that many people in Mesopotamia worshipped, and perhaps even Abraham's relatives, because we're told in the book of Joshua, scripture reports, "Your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, and they served other gods." Now, if you went to Heron today, the site of Tel Heron, you would see these very famous beehive houses, they're called, these structures that look like beehives. And it's a type of house, a style that's been used for thousands of years in Mesopotamia, but the ones that are at Haran right now have only been constructed in the last 200 years. So that would be my pick for number 9, the number 9 site or discovery related to Abraham.
Yeah, very good. Well, these important locations, people reading their Bibles, they see these locations mentioned, and it's hard sometimes for modern people to, get a sense of the extraordinary importance of these ancient cities. So it's good that we have archaeological evidence that helps to illustrate and to give some context. I know a number of years ago I went to the University of Pennsylvania. They had an extraordinary display of jewelry from Ur, and I remember how much that helped me. It brought the city to life by seeing all of these different things that had been discovered from Dr. Woolley's excavations there. So anyway, very, very good. So Ur and Haran and these cities are important.
As we can see, scholars support the Ur in the northern part of the Levant, And logic also will indicate that this would be the Ur that Abraham came from. The scriptures tell us everything we need to know. This map shows all the verses as to why Abraham likely came from the northern Levantine Ur. So, of course, when it comes to Ur, Abraham migrates from Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran, the northern view. And Abraham migrates from Haran to the promised land. And as you can see, it's a very closer migration for him to go from the Ur in the Levant rather than going all the way from the Ur in Iraq. It's a lot closer. Furthermore, Eleazar brings Rebekah from Padam Aram to marry Isaac. And when he went there, he went to the area that was in the northern part of Mesopotamia or in Syria, rather than going all the way to Iraq, much like what the Christian archaeologist said in the video. And Jacob also returns to Shechem from Padab Aram, which is in Haran. And so it seems to me that a lot of logic would indicate that this would be the type of region Abraham would have lived in and been from, the northern Levantine Ur. And so, but now let's look into the archaeology of Ur. Who are the people that created the city of Ur? According to some Jewish and Muslim sources, Ur is Ur Kasdim, the hometown of Abraham and grandfather of Jacob, whom God named Israel. The area was part of a network of the first human settlements where the agricultural revolution took place. Because of its association with Jewish, Christian, and Islamic history and a legend according to which it was the homeland of Abraham, Ur is nicknamed as the City of Prophets. And again, this is the northern Ur. Ur is one of the truly ancient cities of the world. And the city began in circa 9000 BCE as a PPNA, pre-pottery Neolithic A, site located near Abraham's pools. It was part of a network of first settlements spanning West Asia where agriculture began. And just so you know, PPNB, or pre-pottery Neolithic B, is part of the pre-pottery Neolithic, a Neolithic culture centered in Upper Mesopotamia and the Levant. Now here's the kicker. Like the early PPNA people, the PPNB culture developed from the Mesolithic Natufian culture. So it's likely that the people who built Ur would be descendants of Natufians. And as you can see down below is the region of the Natufian culture going from Sinai in the Negev all the way up into Syria. And here is the pre-pottery Neolithic B site, again going from in the Negev all the way up into Syria. So let's learn a little bit more about this era of time. Prior to the adoption of agriculture in Southwest Asia and elsewhere in the world, for that matter, the human triad practiced hunter-gatherer techniques in order to survive. The evolution of agricultural in Southwest Asia generally follows a series of cultural transitions that begin with the Natufians, followed by the pre-pottery Neolithic A, like in Ur, and pre-pottery Neolithic B, and then finally the development of pottery itself. The Natufians stand as an important cultural transition because they were the last hunter-gatherers in the Middle East. The Natufians appeared near the Sea of Galilee in what is now present-day Israel. And so again, here is the area of Natufian culture going all across the Levant, from the northern Levant to the southern Levant. Same thing with pre-pottery Neolithic B sites because it's pretty much the same people. And so the Urfa man resembles both carvings at nearby Galospi Tep and statues found at An Gazelle. Two of these villages have become the nucleus for the major cities of Ur and Haran. So what's interesting about this is, again, Ur and Haran being two famous major cities around the same time period fits with Genesis chapter 11 that Abraham migrates from Ur to Haran. And I'm just going to read what it says. And Terah took his son Abram, and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So it makes a lot of sense for Abram to just migrate to Ur to Haran and then eventually making their journey all the way to Shechem. These two cities would have existed around the same time in the same region, built likely by Natufians when it comes to Ur. And so the earth of man resembles both carvings at nearby Golospi Tep and statues found at En Gazel. Now, what's interesting about this is that En Gazel is a Neolithic archaeological site located in the metropolitan Amman, Jordan. And when it comes to this region, we actually find very high amounts of haplogroup E. It says Y DNA haplogroup E1B1B1B2 has been found at 75% of the En Gazel population, along with 60% of the pre-pottery Neolithic B populations, and in most Natufians. So we see this interesting similar cultures both in the southern Levant and the northern Levant, and it's likely that they are the same people. So here is the samples and the region of Amman, Jordan, where we find haplogroup E1B1B in the time period of pre-pottery Neolithic. And here is a map overlaying the Natufian area of culture and the area in which Abraham would have traveled. He's basically in the Natufian zone. And of course, we know that Natufians are the ancestors of Semites. I seem to come to the conclusion that Abraham's ancestors would have been Natufians. And just to read what this paper says, in Hot Pursuit of Language and Prehistory, this paper makes an additional inference, since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. And Natufians had haplogroup E. This is from Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus reveals core of West Eurasian ancestry, and it reads, such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Levant, in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. And this paper is called Ancient DNA from Chalcolithic Israel, reveals the role of population mixture in cultural transformation. And it says, this findings contrasts with both earlier Neolithic and Epipaleolithic Levantine populations, which were dominated by haplogroup E. So the Levant was dominated by haplogroup E in the Neolithic and the Epipaleolithic, when the city of Ur would have been built. And of course, we can't forget that there are scientists that do say haplogroup E is Proto-Semitic. This is the paper from haplogroup E1B1B by DNA from EUpedia, and it says E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B, and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. And this is exactly when Semites began to migrate. This is from the Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages, identifies an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East, and it says, we estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by an expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. And this fits along with haplogroup E with early Semites. This paper is called How Eurasia Was Born, and it says the most plausible candidates for Semitic remigration into the Fertile Crescent with TMRCAs fitting the arrival of the Akkadians and other early Semitic peoples are certain subclades of both E-V22 and E-V12 with relatively early MRCAs present in the Middle East could be candidates for such remigration, such as E-FGC14382 and E-V3262. So early Semites and Akkadians would have had these E markers migrating throughout the Fertile Crescent. And here's just an image of the migration of these early Semites, and beginning from the Levant, going into Mesopotamia, going into the northern Levant, and throughout the rest of the Middle East. And here's a map showing the spread of Semitic languages. Fits perfectly with the spread of haplogroup E from the Levant, going into Mesopotamia, going into Arabia, going into the Horn of Africa. So Abraham likely came from the city of Ur in the northern Levant. This city of Ur was built by pre-pottery Neolithic B Natufians. Natufians are the ancestors of Semites. Therefore, it's highly likely that the Ur Abraham came from was built by his ancestors. Therefore, if Ur of the northern Levant was built by Abraham's ancestors, then Abraham likely was of Natufian ancestry. Since Abraham is a Semite, it's highly likely Abraham's ancestors are Natufians. And with this revelation that Natufians built Ur, then I would say yes. If this is the case, then the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would have haplogroup E. Haplogroup E was among Natufians and Proto-Semitic populations. After all, Jewish populations today are still found to have haplogroup E. Samaritan Levites in Israel, Jews who claim descent from King David, Ethiopian and African Jews, Yemeni Jews, Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, etc. Looking beyond the geographical patterns, E-M123 is also quite common in many Semitic language communities, including among both Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, accounting for over 10% of all male lineages. And here's a paper dealing with it even more. Haplogroup E3b1, defined by M78, was found in all 9 populations at frequencies of 10 through 16.7%. The Samaritan family Kohan carries this haplotype. Haplogroup E3b3, defined by M123, was present at 5 to 20% in Ethiopian, Ashkenazi, Libyan, and Yemenite Jews, and in Palestinians. And so famously, Albert Einstein actually had haplogroup E. Albert Einstein is presumed to have belonged to wide haplogroup E-Z38, descent of Naphtali. Approximately 20% of Ashkenazi Jews belong to haplogroup E1b1b. Adolf Hitler even had haplogroup E1b1b, and of course haplogroup E is often associated with the origins of Semitic languages, which also includes Semitic people. And so E-M215 and E-M35 are quite common among Afroasiatic speakers. The linguistic group and carriers of E-M35 lineage have a high probability to have arisen and dispersed together from the Afroasiatic homeland. Amongst populations with an Afroasiatic speaking history, a significant portion of Jewish male lineages are E-M35. Haplogroup E-M35, which accounts for approximately 18% to 20% of Ashkenazi and 8.6% to 30% of the Sephardi Y chromosomes, appears to be one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population. And that's very powerful. Haplogroup E may be one of the major founding lineages of Jewish people. Furthermore, this E-Z830, this is a recent discovery subclade which has not yet been included in most haplogroup trees. E-Z830 includes the confirmed subclades of E-M123, E-V15, which includes E-M293, E-V42, E-V6, E-V92, and E-Z830, and is a sibling clade to E-L19. Currently, the E-M35 phylogeny project recognizes 4 distinct clusters of Z830 carriers, 2 of which are exclusively Jewish in origin. And so here are they. Here are the ones that are exclusively Jewish. It is E-PF1975. This cluster is now characterized by SNP-PF1975. Formerly, this was known as cluster E-Z830A, Jewish cluster. And then you have E-PF152. This cluster is now characterized by SNP-PF1952. Formerly, this was known as cluster E-Z830B, Jewish cluster. And here's a paper dealing with the percentages of haplogroup E among Jewish, Ashkenazi, and Sephardic Jewish populations. It's basically in Jewish population, Ashkenazi populations at 18.2%, and Sephardic Jewish populations at 30%. And so here is a test, as a paper as well, dealing with rabbinical Jewish lineages. And it says another three lineages, or nearly 1/4 of them, 23.1%, belong to the E-M35/E-L117 haplogroup. E-L117 is the previous haplogroup classification for E-M35. This is right in the middle of the range of 15 through 30% that has been cited as the percentage of all Jewish males who belong to the E1B1B-E-M35 haplogroup. And so here is a chart showing Ethiopian Semitic speakers and Ethiopian Jews. A lot of them have different branches of haplogroup E. Here are all the sources, by the way. And so here is a source dealing with Jews and haplogroup E as well. All paternal descendants of the Withnerum Garithman rabbinical lineage share the L117 SNP of Y DNA haplogroup E, previously described as E-M35. E-M35, 1, and E1B1B1 in the literature. Y DNA characteristic that all descendants of the Garithman rabbinical lineage share is that they all belong to the E-L117 haplogroup. And this, by the way, is talking about a rabbinic family with a very famous, prominent rabbinic family with haplogroup E. And it says, according to the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, ISOGG, and National Geographic's Genographic Project, E1B1B1 may have arisen instead in the Near East or the Middle East and then expanded into the Mediterranean with the spread of agriculture. Haplogroup E-M35, which accounts for approximately 18 to 20% of Ashkenazi and 8.6% to 30% of Sephardi Y chromosomes, appears to be one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population. It is the most prevalent haplogroup among the Jewish population outside of haplogroup J. Samaritan communities have traditions of descending from the tribe of Levi, suggesting that the E1B1B1 men claiming to be Levites may have existed in Israel before the diaspora of 70 AD. And so the priestly Kohen lineage from the tribe of Levi actually have haplogroup E. And so it says, however, the biggest and most important Samaritan family, the Kohen family, tradition, tribe of Levi, was found to belong to haplogroup E. This article predated the change of the classification of haplogroup E3B1-M78 to E3B1A-M78, and the further subdivision of E3B1A E-M78 into 6 subclades based on the research of Crenuni. And so this is very interesting because we know Levi comes from Jacob and then from Isaac to Abraham. So them having E is very interesting. Samaritan Levites specifically have haplogroup E up to 100%. Here are all the references, by the way. And just to talk about other Semitic populations, Arabs in Egypt also have haplogroup E up to 30 to 62%. And Arabs in Palestine, like the Christian ones, have haplogroup E up to 30%, as well as Arabs in the Jordan near the Dead Sea have 30%. So it's very interesting. So E-M78 was a major founding lineage of West Semitic people and northern Egyptian lower classes, slaves, workers, and shepherds. E-M78 is an indicator of a second wave of out of Africa of Proto-Semitic people during the early Bronze Age. This most definitely was not just one haplogroup, but included many. Y-DNA E-M78 is a good migration indicator for this second wave. A significant majority of Jewish families with tradition of descent from King David are found in E-M78, a lineage that underwent a severe ancient extinction event in the conquest, exilic, and Roman periods. History indicates that there would likely have been very few survivors of this lineage, but a discussion that belongs to a different thread, though. So here is a paper actually dealing with this. People who have lineage from King David, who claim lineage from King David with haplogroup E. This is from Y-DNA Research Studies of Rabbinical Lineages and Their Importance to the Jewish Genealogy by Dr. Jeffrey Mark Paul. And it says the Loria rabbinical lineage has one of the oldest family trees in the world. It's very powerful. The Loria rabbinical lineage has one of the oldest family trees in the world, claiming to trace back at least to King David, born in 1037 BCE. The first Loria in the lineage was Rabbi Aaron Loria, 14 through 1480, who married Miriam Spinria, the daughter of Rabbi Shlomo Spinria, the founder of the Shlomo rabbinical lineage. Forgive me for my mispronunciations. We tested 2 pedigreed paternal descendants of the Loria rabbinical lineage, whose common ancestor was Rabbi Jacob Aaron Loria of Macoville, 1753 through 1788. The predicted haplogroup to which the 2 pedigreed Loria descendants belong to E-M35. The confirmed haplogroup is awaiting the results of the big Y-700 test. The previous nomenclature for this haplogroup, E1B1B1, was cited for Loria descendants of Rabbi Jokel Loria, 1435 through 1490. The 2 Loria descendants have an average of 29 genetic matches at 37 STR markers, representing 21 different surnames from geologically relevant genetic matches, 34-37 STR markers. The 95% probability predicted for the TMRCA is within 8 generations. So this is very powerful. We have one of the oldest rabbinical lineages who claim descent from King David with haplogroup E. So, and they have the oldest family tree. It's very interesting. So here is so this is why haplogroup E it's a very high probability that the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would have had it. Haplogroup E, after all, is an Afro-Asiatic Semitic marker. The Israelites and their ancestors are an Afro-Asiatic Semitic people. Remember, they are Semitic, they are Afro-Asiatic. The Israelites, the Hebrews, they are a Semitic-speaking people of the Iron Age in the ancient Near East. And remember what Peter Solomon says about haplogroup E. In this group, many of us conclude that haplogroup E is one of the major founding haplogroups of the Semitic people, and that haplogroup E people were the ones who brought Proto-Semitic language out of Africa, out of the Afro-Asiatic homeland in Northeast Africa into the Levant and Mesopotamia. Abraham came from the region of Padad Amram, / Amram Nehoram, near Syria. So now let's look at the people in ancient Syria in this time, because it was a very mixed area. Although many peoples lived in this land, there was an ancient Semitic inhabitants that was described by writers as being very dark skinned, specifically, basically black in complexion. Not only are there depictions, but there are also descriptions of these black Syrians / Aramians by other local peoples, such as the Syrians and also foreign peoples like the Egyptians. So there are descriptions and depictions. So this is where I believe Abraham would have lived. He would have lived in Kasdim and in Syria, near Amram, as you can see. And let's deal with the descriptions. So this is from Henry Skersey, who says the white Syrians whom Strabo places in this region must be Hittites. Indeed, there are specially contrasts with the black Syrians, who are said to live east of Armenus and must consequently be Aramians. So basically, east of Armenus, there are a group of black-skinned Syrians who are called Aramians. And so here's the Armenius Mountains, and he said it's east, so it'll be in this locality. And of Kasdim would also be east of the Armenius Mountains, because this is where the Armenius Mountains would be, and it'll be towards the east in the similar geographical region that Abraham would have been in, such as Padad and Maram. So let's look at the people of this region. So it says the Chaba Arabs, the present possessors of the south of the more southern parts of Babylonia, are nearly black, and the black Syrians of whom Strabo speaks seems intended to represent the Babylonians. So of course Strabo even spoke, a Greek historian even spoke of these black Syrians, or these black Syrians, and even connects them to Babylonia, the southern parts of Babylonia as well. And by the way, that was from the greatest empires and civilizations of the ancient world by George Rawlson. And here's another quote from a dictionary of Greek and Roman geography. It says, Lycio Syri, the ancient name of the Syrians inhabiting Cappadocia, by which they were distinguished from the more southern Syrians who were of a darker complexion. So again, from various quotes, we do see that there are two types of Syrians. I'm not saying that every single Syrian is black. According to these quotes, there are two types of Syrians. You have lighter skinned Syrians that seem to have been a little bit more north and west. And then you have the darker Syrians who seem to be a little bit more south of Syria and a little bit more east of Syria. So it wasn't just all dark skinned. There was definitely lighter skinned or whiter skinned Syrians. But basically what I'm alluding to is that there's two types of Syrians in ancient times, according to the Greeks and the Romans. So here's a depiction of the dark-skinned Syrians or Arameans. This is a fresco from Tel Barship, and this is the king of Assyria actually conquering these peoples, and they are obviously a dark brown-skinned people with seemingly locks of hair. Yes, I would say that's locks of hair. And here is Tel Bakiris, the region where this king of Assyria conquered these Syrian or Aramean peoples. Very close, of course, to the area that Abraham would have lived in of Kasdim, where all these people are said to have been dark-skinned Syrians. So it's very interesting. And so you can actually find this fresco at the Louvre Museum. They have it there. And again, they depict these light-skinned Assyrians attacking these very dark-skinned Syrians or Aramians, um, who have a dark brown complexion, black hair with locks. Here's a little closer image from inside the museum, someone who took a photo. And also, the Egyptians depicted these dark-skinned people in Syria, Bedouin people in Syria from ancient times. You can find this at the Global Museum, the Global Egyptian Museum.org. The description, as you can see right here, head of a Bedouin from Syria, and it says the description, head with brown red skin, and it goes into the rest of it. But yes, this is from Egypt, ancient Egypt. Another one from Syria. This is the global museum, the Global Egyptian Museum.org. Again, head of a Bedouin from Syria, and again, head with brown red skin. And this is again from ancient Egypt, dealing with Syria. Some of the inhabitants, some of the people they captured. And so when you put all these images together, both the depiction by the Assyrians and the depiction by the Egyptians of these dark-skinned Syrians or Arameans, you kind of do see a very interesting commonality between them all. First, the skin tone. Obviously, both ethnic groups, the Assyrians, when they depicted these people, and the Egyptians, when they depicted these people, depicted them dark brown skinned. Furthermore, they depicted them with these locks of hair, which I found to be very interesting. The Assyrians depicted them with locks of hair, and the Egyptians depicted them with locks of hair. Furthermore, they also depicted them with these hair. I almost want to say not a crown, but like a head wrap or a type of band around the head. I'll say a band. So the Assyrians depicted these groups with bands around their heads, and so did the Egyptians. So I find that to be very interesting. How in two different parts of the world, in Assyria and Egypt, they're depicting these black or these dark-skinned Syrians or Arameans very similarly. It's very interesting. So Abraham could have looked like these quote unquote, black or brown Syrians, since he comes from that part of the world of Padad Amram and Aram Nahor. So, according to the scriptures, Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldeans. Now, although Chaldeans didn't exist in Abraham's time, when the writers of the Torah needed to update certain parts of the scriptures with the modern audience, they typically did that a lot. They may have used the word Chaldean to explain who Abraham was or where Abraham came from. You find these updates often in scripture. In scripture, another example, a quick example I'll give is using the term Para Ramses when it comes to the Exodus, but originally that region was the Avaris or Goshen. That's just a quick example. That was an update in scriptures. But anyways, with that being said, understanding who these ancient Chaldeans are could give us a hint into what Abraham could have looked like. Ancient Chaldeans have been described as looking like Elamites, which is really interesting. This is even a tradition. There's even a tradition in the book of Jubilees that Arphaxad, an ancestor of Abraham, married an Elamite. So, Genesis chapter 11, verse 27 through 32, it says, "This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarah, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there." So this book is Prehistoric Nations by John D. Baldwin. So he says the region known as Susnia was politically connected with Chaldea from the earliest times. It was occupied by people of the same race, who in the course of time may have developed a Susnian dialect of the common language. This region was probably inhabited in the distinct first colonized in the this region was probably included in the district first colonized by the Cushites. In its ruins are of great antiquity and show plainly their Cushite tongue. So basically, John D. Baldwin is saying that the people of Susnia and Chaldea are from the same race. And Susnia, by the way, is the capital of Elam. So let's go into that. This is another quote, but it's by A.H. Skazy, talking about ancient Babylonians. He says, as however, M. Defone's excavations on the site of Susia have brought to light inbuilt bricks of the Elamite period, on which a black race of mankind is portrayed. It may mean that the primitive Sumerian population of Chaldea was really black skinned. So basically saying that, when it comes to the primitive population of Chaldea, that the inhabitants could have been black skinned based on M. Defone's excavations and what he found when it comes to the Elamite period. And so this is from The Negro in the New World by Sir Henry H. Johnson. He says the Elamites of Mesopotamia appear to have been a Negroid people with kinky hair and to have transmitted this racial type to the Jews and Syrians. An evident Negro element is in Babylonia. It is possible that in or the verge of the verge of Arabia, the ancient basal stock of the generalized Negro parted, divided into two streams of divergent immigrations, one to proceed to Europe via Syria and the other to pass through Arabia to Egypt and tropical Africa. In Arabia or in Egypt, it may be arose the difference between the long-headed African Negro. But the main thing to get out of this is the fact that the Elamites of Mesopotamia, they looked like a Negroid people and they had kinky hair, and there was a Negro element in Babylonia. And interestingly enough, it may have been passed to the Jews and the Syrians. But the interesting one is the Syrians because, of course, Abraham coming from what we just talked about, Abraham and the dark-skinned Syrians. That part is very interesting. But the Book of Jubilees says, or there is a tradition, should I say, in the Book of Jubilees that Arphaxad married an Elamite. So Elam named Susnia, whose daughter Reshunia married Arphaxad, progenitor of another branch of Semites. Sushan, or Susia, was the ancient capital of the Elamite Empire, mentioned in Daniel chapter 8, verse 2. So you have Arphaxad, an ancestor of Abraham, marry an Elamite, according to the Book of Jubilees. And here it is right here, Book of Jubilees, chapter 8. Arphaxad took to himself a wife, and her name was Ashrezeah, the daughter of Susia, the daughter of Elam. And forgive me for my mispronunciation. So, with Arphaxad marrying an Elamite woman, what do Elamites look like? And as you can see on your screen, this is Elamites. Clearly, they are a dark brown-skinned people with, as the writers say, a kinky curly hair, and I can see why that they would quote unquote call them Cushites, even though they're not Cushites; these are Semites. But even when it comes to their quote unquote gods, they also depicted them dark brown, reddish dark brown skin with kinky hair. Here are more images of Elamites on the walls of Elam with their spears and their arrows, their bows and arrows, depicted very dark skin, all of them with very kinky curly hair, wearing headbands as well. Here's another image of Elamite gods depicted just like the Elamite people, with brown, dark brown skin, and very kinky curly hair, thick bushy hair, both for the gods and for the men. And here's more images. They depicted themselves like this over and over again. There's a lot of them. This is why a lot of old anthropologists were like, these people are clearly either Cushitic or that they're Negro, but these are definitely Semites. They're just dark-skinned Semites. It's simple as that. And there are plenty of images of these dark-skinned Elamite people, black hair, dark eyes, dark brown skin, etc., etc. So the Chaldeans are represented as looking like Elamites. That's what I want you to get from this. Chaldeans are said to look like Elamites, and furthermore, an ancestor of Abraham. If we take the book of Jubilees to be true, an ancestor of Abraham mixed with these people, or got with these people. So Abraham could have looked like an Elamite. The Elamites, even though they are Semitic, they are described as looking African. Therefore, Semites from Shem to Abraham could have looked African, either Negroid or Cushitic. Now, with the nativity of Abraham being Ur of the Chaldeans, it is likely that the writers connected Abraham to Chaldeans of their day. If this is so, what did ancient Chaldeans specifically look like? So now let's look at the Chaldeans themselves, the ancient ones. Again, reiterating this verse, Genesis chapter 11, verse 27 through 32. This is the genealogy of Terrah. Terrah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terrah in his native land, in Ur of the Chaldeans. So, remember what was said about the Chaldeans when it comes to the Natufians. They may have been the ancestors of the Arabs or the Semites in biblical times, in Sir Arthur Keith's opinions, talking about the Natufians. Furthermore, it says, in addition to these riddles, Sir Arthur Keith propounded another linking them unaccountably to ancient Ur of the Chaldeans and the prehistoric man of South Africa. So the Natufians seem to biologically be linked to Ur of the Chaldees, which is interesting. So again, Natufians is another great example of how Proto-Semites could have looked, how Abraham could have looked, and his people. And of course, when it comes to Natufians, it is a further surprise that the Epio-Paleolithic Natufian of Israel, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to have arisen, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. So there you go with that. So now let's look at the Chaldeans. Let's specifically go to them. So according to Smith's Bible Dictionary, it appears that the Chaldeans were in the earliest times merely one out of many Cushite tribes inhabiting the Great Alvum plain, known afterwards as Chaldea or Babylonia. So according to Smith's Bible Dictionary, Chaldeans may have been a Cushite people, and of course Cushite is a very flimsy term. Basically, they're saying that they could have been black. And let's look at more quotes dealing with Chaldeans. So this is from History of Ancient Civilization. This is by Charles Sosgobos. Excuse me. The Chaldeans in the plain of the Euphrates. They were peoples of sedentary and peaceful pursuits. Their skin was dark, the hair short and thick, and the lips strong. Some terms them Cushites, others Hamites. So interesting. Again, we're seeing that Chaldeans are sort of being represented as a African-looking people, dark skin, thick, short hair, strong lips. So it's very interesting. So this is from Prehistoric Nations by John D. Baldwin. He says, all the best qualified investigators agree that the evidence already obtained shows conclusively the Cushite or Ethiopian origin of Chaldea. So yet again, we see that Chaldea is being represented with a African look of people, Cushitic or Ethiopian type. This book is a book of the beginnings, volume 2 by Gerald Massey. And he says the primitive Chaldeans and Babylonians were known to the Greeks by the name of Chaldeans and Kephians. The Kephians were synonymous with Ethiopians. So yet again, we're seeing this connection with African peoples, with Chaldeans. And so this is from The Beginnings of Civilization by Charles Woodward Hudson. He says, the Cushite Arabians and possibly the Chaldeans are the founders of the first historic civilization in Babylonia, being certainly Hamitic, though early mixed with Semitic tribes long before the Assyrian rule. So yet again, we're seeing Chaldeans being connected to Cushite Arabians, which could be your Joktonites, and being, connected to Hamitic peoples, which is very interesting. So here is actually a depiction of Chaldeans. This is from University of Cambridge, Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. And this is Chaldean soldiers with a certain group of captives. I'm not going to reveal who the captives are. I'll touch on who those captives are later. But here are the depictions of Chaldeans. This is a depiction by the Greeks. As you can see right here, this is the Greek language. And so this is from the 11th century. So here's a closer image, by the way. These are Chaldeans. And looking at the Chaldeans, they do pretty much fit what those writers were saying, how, Chaldeans are. Dark-skinned, short, thick hair, and they look, quote-unquote, Ethiopian or quote-unquote Cushitic or quote-unquote Hamitic because they're dark-skinned. That's what a lot of those old anthropologists mean, by the way, when they say, oh, Ethiopian or Cushitic. Chaldeans are a Semitic people, so they're not Cushites or Hamites, they're Semitic. But they look Hamitic is basically what they're saying. And I will agree, they're dark-skinned. They're clearly a brown-skinned people with dark hair and dark eyes. So, with that being said, it's highly likely that Abraham could have looked like these ancient Chaldeans. Ancient Chaldeans looked African, so Abraham could have looked African. Based on all of this from a young Earth perspective, and technically you can even use this for an old Earth perspective, but based on a young Earth perspective, I would say that Proto-Semites from Shem going down the line to Abraham from the genealogy would have looked somewhat African, but also Arabian. But with a visual representation of what Semites and what Abraham could have looked like using everything we covered, here's basically the summary. This is how Abraham and early Semites could have looked. Everything on one nice image. We have the Chaldeans, the people of Mari, Syria, the Black Syrians or Aramians, the Elamites, the Black Bedouins of Syria, and the Sabaeans and Abyssinians, everything on one image. So this is how I would say, early Semites, how I would say Abraham could have looked like based on everything we covered, just dealing with ancient populations alone. This is the best example that I can provide. So, as stated before, I would say Proto-Semites from Shem going down to Abraham from the genealogy would look somewhat African, but also Arabian. After all, early Asiatics looked African, and early Semites were believed to be Africans. Early West Asians resemble Africans, sources at the top. a comparison of craniofacial features of major human groups. And here is from a conversation with Christopher Eretz. After all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. And as we know, Shem, he is the ancestor of Semitic peoples, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are descendants of Shem. Therefore, I would say Abraham could have looked something like this. To summarize, dark-skinned, medium brown to black, black hair, dark brown eyes. Simple as that. That's how I think Abraham would have looked, as well as Isaac and Jacob and the 12 sons. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the 12 sons would have looked dark-skinned, either medium brown to black, black hair, perhaps curly or wavy, and dark brown eyes. And this is the image I would say Abraham would have looked. I think biblical Abraham would have looked something like this man right here. This is my best example, I would say, for Abraham.